which sounds easy, but it's not actually so easy to find details about this. And if you go to individual universities, they're very, very secretive about it in some ways, not surprisingly. But I found information from America and also Australia, which seemed to correlate with our own experience here, and also some more recent reports or papers that have been published in the UK. But this particular paper was very good, and the references at the bottom there if anybody wants to follow this up. It's written over 10 years ago, but it's still very valid. And you'll see at the end of this presentation, when we make the slides available, that I've summarized it in terms of some of the key findings to come out of it. But the surprising fact was, not surprising to a lot of us who supervise, is that if you can complete your PhD on time, you're doing very, very well indeed. And that's our ultimate goal. I suppose the jewel in the crown is a 3-year or 5-year PhD. 5 years if you do it part-time, 3 years if you do it full-time. That, in our experience, kind of rarely happens unless you're in, but it varies by different disciplines. So the nearest thing I found to business schools, I could find lots of information from education departments who study this themselves, and also social sciences, was that a lot of people really complete within 7 to 10 years, but 56% do actually complete in 6 years or less. And that sort of figure does ring a bell that we often see. Remember that this is social sciences and social workers from this paper. Therefore, a lot of these people are mature students, and they are part-time. Well, they go into part-time mode after studying full-time for maybe 3 years. And that's something that happens quite a lot. So a lot of people do extend their PhD into part-time completion, and the critical stage is very much what they call ABD, all but dissertation. So get to that point, and then you become a little bit sort of slowed down or immersed in what you're trying to do to write up the PhD, having studied and collected your data and analysed your data, etc. There is some theory behind that paper, which is called a social development theory, and as I say, that you can find out a bit more about that by reading the paper, and I'd recommend you do, because it's very well written and very informative. But as I say, I'll try to summarise that with some of the slides at the end of this presentation, which you can look afterwards. One interesting thing that did come out of it was that I found this. This is from Witkowski, psychology of learning, and his concept of scaffolding, where you kind of layer up your learning from one stage to another. Was that students, and this is the journey I'll just talk about in a second or two. You move from a zone of what's called current development, that's your current situation, to a zone of proximal development. Therefore, you're going from simple to more complex tasks as you progress through the PhD. And that's where we talk about rigour and relevance, etc. And what you're trying to do is move to a point of having independent discovery and to understand how to use appropriate tools and methods and methodologies and all the sorts of things that you have to do to get to an end point of your PhD successfully. So a very good reference there. Just to brighten things up, anybody, I hope, well, lots of people might have read works by Homer. I know people in government all do PPE, but so they'll all be well versed in this, but still a good story. But your PhD is really an odyssey. It's a navigation between lots of obstacles and lots of scary things, maybe scary monsters. And also, you could view it as going from a research idea up to your completed thesis at the end of it. And as I said, the previous slide and the research shows that can take anything, usually up to 7 years. But your target initially when you set out, if you're full-time, is 3, and if you're part-time, it's 5. But that rarely kind of occurs in our experience, in our discipline. I'm not saying that doesn't occur in other disciplines like science, chemistry, and engineering, which are far more lab-based and far more structured in terms of what they have to do in terms of writing up experiments and then presenting that at the end of it. So we're navigating between what we call our Charybdis and our Scylla, which are 2 monsters basically. which are very difficult to find a fine balance between, which is research rigor and relevance and impact. If you go down one route, if you go down the rigor route, so you'll spend a lot of time have a lot of angst about your methodology and your methods and your research approach and your research philosophy. What is your epistemology and what is your ontology and all this type of thing. And sometimes you lose the plot in terms of what you're trying to do, your original research idea, and how that can be relevant to society, relevant to your particular problem area. And following on from that is whether that can have impact. Impact is the buzzword at the moment in research terms, is to how you can do good in society, basically, how you can have reach and significance from your research. And that makes it worthwhile. Otherwise, if it becomes too much, perhaps, of a rigorous process, it can be a complex intellectual endeavor. But at the end of the day, you want to ask, where is this actually going? What's it actually saying to anybody? What are you trying to say to anybody? So that's why it's called, between a rock and a hard place, between the devil and the deep blue sea. That's the idea. So if anybody wants to follow that up, Charybdis was in Sicily and Scylla was over into the Calabria coast. I've just been on holiday in Sicily before the COVID outbreak. I know that area quite well. It's very beautiful. So the next thing is looking between that rigor and relevance debate is really is to understand. We find this a lot when we have these conferences, especially in the last 5 years plus, is that we used to have an old-fashioned term called information systems and information systems departments. So people had a home, really, a community which they belonged to. And PhD students knew that they could work within that discipline. That's become very diffuse now. You rarely get an information systems department, if any. And we all work very much in different areas. And the UKAIS conference is very good, and the doctoral consortium is very good, because it's the first time sometimes we all come together and we make these connections between our different subdisciplines and our main discipline, and try to work out who our main audience is. So the idea this was a slide I did years ago at the Doctoral Consortium, but it's been updated by myself and Laurence now. And it's very relevant in terms of, firstly, I mean, one of the most important things, which examiners do you pick? Are they in the same area as you? Are they going to be sympathetic to what you're trying to study and what you're trying to say? So that's very important. Who is your community that you work with to try to help you along the way, to help that scaffolding process, that peer group of what we call significant others who are going to stimulate you, help you along your way, give you constructive, friendly critique of your work, etc. It's very important that we understand this. And that's why the Doctoral Consortium is so important, because we bring people together, and for the first time, sometimes for people, they meet other people that are exactly experiencing the same problems as they are, the same issues, and they get a very rewarding experience from meeting them and discussing their work and getting feedback on that. So over on the left-hand side, we've got information systems. Over the right-hand side, we've got computing and informatics, and that's a very blurred boundary these days, except that perhaps the computing and informatics area is sometimes a little bit more concerned with user design and computing practitioners and user experience, and also the hardware, the artifacts of computing. And then we've got engineering above that, and mathematics, data science. And on our side, we've got e-business, digital business, information management, librarianship, and management practitioners, and not least systems and operations management, where we used to have a discipline, well, we still have, it's very, very important, more important than ever now with COVID, is systems thinking. And systems thinking was something that was absolutely essential and core to understanding information systems. And it's nice when you see that surfacing in PhDs and helping people to structure problems and to solve problems, which are real world problems, hence moving towards that, making your doctorate relevant to a problem in society or problem area that you're dealing with. So, and in the middle of all of that, we've got the responsibility side, which is come to the fore in the last 10 years, to do with ethics and morals and working out what good we can do with computer systems, as opposed to the malevolent aspects of it, especially with cyber hacking and crimes, fraud, and all the things that go on, and the way that data can be misappropriated and misused. And that will come to the fore. You know how important that is at the moment, with talking about with COVID, and having an app coming out in 2 weeks that's going to trace everybody's movement with Bluetooth, and try to do track, trace, and whatever, to try to understand the spread of the COVID virus. But you will have to sign away some of your rights to say that whoever's going to be collecting that data, whether it's the NHS or whatever, will be responsible, and will keep it anonymous, because it will have an immense amount of detail about where people are and where they move and what they do, minute by minute. And that could be moving forward to a new form of a new normal, as they're starting to describe it now, society. Moving on quite.
I just want to point out on that previous slide, I think it's also useful to sort of point out that whilst these are the areas that the discipline kind of exists within, there is also an element of choice there as well. And part of this is about, for your PhD, what is it you want to do with it? Where do you want it to take you? Do you want to go into a more kind of business-oriented discipline, whether it's within academia or outside, or do you want to go into the more kind of technical? And I think often people go, oh, you know, my PhD is taking me into, well, actually, no, you have more control over that. And I think what's useful about this sort of diagram is to go, well, actually, there are these range of different reference disciplines that we can tap into, but also we can choose what we want to bring in. We can also choose what we want to leave out. As David said, it's also, you know, it's partly about kind of maybe who's going to kind of validate it or examine it, but it's also about you thinking about, okay, where is my PhD taking me in terms of kind of the longer term, the career, where do I want it to go? And I've actually just had this conversation with one of my own PhD students where we were talking about, well, you know, she's still quite early on, but you know, what is this doing in terms of your kind of life plan, if you have one, or where do you think it's going to take you? And to just be kind of aware that, you know, if you want to go in a particular direction, then you can make choices about what you draw into your PhD so that you're best set up to be able to go in that direction once you've finished. I think it's not the end of it, is it? You know, a lot of people go, oh, I do the end of the PhD and now that's it. No, you don't expire at the end. It's just the next stage that you kind of go into.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Laurence. Sometimes the PhD becomes a goal in itself, and there's nothing beyond that. People get so wrapped up in it. And going back to the first slide, when PhDs get to 6 years or 7 years, it then becomes a career almost, and it's very difficult to terminate it, because it becomes the love of your life. You can have a lot of fun doing a PhD and a lot of enjoyment out of it, and sometimes it can take over your life. And I think that's an important point to make. You know, where's the goal going? But there's also institutional support you've got to look to say, and your mentorship support to say, where am I going with this? Am I going back into industry, for instance, be a practitioner, a consultant, or am I going into academia? What do I need to do to get into those career paths? But also going back to that slide, it also is a pointer to where you're going to publish, because often this is, you've got a really good piece of work in your PhD, and, you know, again, to make it relevant, to get impact from it, and to also get legitimacy for your PhD, you want to publish it somewhere. To get that peer review and that peer feedback. And it's very important to know the right targets. And all of these areas, these disciplines, have sets of journals attached to them, sets of conferences attached to them. So it's a question of, you know, where do I put my money really? Where do I place my bet to get the best results here? If I put my paper into, and it's all about sociology, and it goes into hard computing journal, well, it's probably going to get rejected. If I'm talking about organizational psychology and I put it into a systems and operations management journal, it's probably going to get rejected. So it's knowing the right target to get your best chances, and also knowing the best conferences to get value out of. You don't want to feel like a fish out of water if you go to a conference and people are not really understanding what you're talking about and you're not understanding what they're talking about. So it's really important to know your particular area and where you're going with this. So it's really crucial, I think. Just moving on a little bit, I thought this would be useful. This comes out of the last couple of years, I've done a couple of fairly significant projects for a couple of universities as a consultant, looking at their PhD processes and systems and their IT support systems and learning systems which are associated with that to report back at a fairly high level. And one of those was in association with Laurence. And what we discovered from that was that with a PhD, it's not all about your research and the beautiful idea that you've got and the rigor that you're putting into that particular process of study. There's also a bureaucracy. There's also a bureaucracy around it, which is all about progress monitoring, tracking. And you've got a few perspectives from three ways, or maybe more than three ways. There's your own personal perspective and sort of individual perspective on your PhD work. There's your supervisor's perspective on it and what they want out of it. Remember that they need something out of the PhD as well. Probably publications, and probably also because they enjoy doing it. It's one of the most enjoyable parts of academic life. And thirdly, there's the institutional view, or the departmental and institutional view. And sometimes the departmental and institutional view can be a little bit overshadowing everything else with the amount of bureaucracy that it imposes on the supervisor and the student. So you've got to navigate your way through all of these generic processes from, basically recruitment right through to weekly or monthly reporting, right through to midterm reporting, right through to final submission of the PhD and the thesis. And people are keeping on top of that, and there's lots of records being kept of it. And sometimes if that record keeping gets a little bit out of hand, it can then impinge on your progress. So it's a question of trying to play the game, really. It has to be done. Otherwise, you won't be ticked off to go to the next stage. But you've got to also use that for your own project management. So that's a big word that sometimes goes missing in a PhD, is project management. How you manage your own progress, how you manage your time, how you get on top of these things and try to get to the end point in the appropriate time period. This was, that was a generic kind of model. This is a process model of it. So this is just what I did for one of those consultancy episodes, but just shows all of the different systems that are involved. It's not a trivial undertaking from a university perspective to track students. Remember that each university, all the major ones in the UK anyway, have up to 700 to 1,000 doctoral students registered and studying at any one time.
No, some have bigger than that. Some are up to 2,000 or 3,000 actually.
Right, it's a growing market in many ways, and a lot of those students are not just purely on site. A lot of them are part-time in industry and practitioners with professional doctorates growing, and also a lot of overseas which are working remotely and doing their fieldwork remotely. So it's a very complex undertaking to track all of that, but also a very complex undertaking for you to understand your role in it, why it's important that you do maintain your records of supervision and your own project management, your own time management within it, and also use all the tools available within that to help you along that particular journey and progress from the top to the bottom, basically, within a good time period. But it amazed me when I went in to study this. And I interviewed about 35 academics, fairly high level, right down to sort of normal supervisors and also students. And the amount of experiences and issues that they disclosed were quite considerable. So it's a very complex task doing a PhD. When I was, we're all having weird dreams at the moment because of COVID, apparently, because we're all anxious. But the other night I had a weird dream that I said, oh, I'll come up with an equation for a PhD, successful PhD. So immediately in the morning, I got up and I wrote it down just off the top of my head. It took about 5 minutes. So this is based on all my experience and what I've been reading. But if we put all of those variables together, the perfect PhD is a function of all of those things. And when we look at that, it is rather, it's a challenge, let's put it that way, to try and do all of these things in the time period and do it well. But if we don't deal with all of these variables, the chances are that we're going to take longer to do our PhD. I'm not saying that we won't complete it eventually, but it will take longer. And also it won't be as enjoyable because it'll start to invade your life and your family life circumstances, which is one of the variables. Also your health could be a problem. And also, not only those variables which affect you, remember, they affect the supervisors as well. So it's really a question of dealing with all of these things. But you don't have to be perfect in dealing with all these things. It's just knowing that they're all important. And you know, if we do tick those boxes and try to look at that in terms of your personal development plans, etc., well then your experience can be a lot better, and that will also increase the relevance of the PhD or the doctorate, sorry, and also the rigor of it, because you're taking on all of that advice and knowledge and feeding it back into the PhD process. So if anybody wants to put numbers on that, they're quite welcome. A bit of multi-criteria decision making. I'm sure Savas might have a go at that. And then we'll come out with a number, which is, I think the big number at the moment is an R number, which we want below 1. So we'll come up with a D number, which is below or equal to 3. And if we get to that point, we'll all be very happy. So yeah, PhDs, complex endeavours.
I think in terms of that equation, though, what you do need to recognise is that there are some elements there that you have more control over, and some that you have less control over. So I noticed, Dave, you've got S for serendipity,
yeah,
which is, you know, chance things happening. But again, when I was talking to one of my students about this, there are just sometimes opportunities which come along, and it's about putting yourself in the right place, being of the right mindset, so that when opportunities do come along, that you actually take them up and you make the most of them. And you know, you know, you don't have control over serendipity, but you have control over what you do in response to it. So it's thinking about what are these different elements, but also about how you react to them, how you deal with them, how much control you have over them, but also, you know, being open to things as well.
I think you're going to talk about this slide, so doctoral student development.
No, I think you are.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Oh, yeah, I see my little name in the bottom. Okay. Doctoral student development is really one of the sometimes the missing elements in terms of PhD.
Oh, they're not open yet. I didn't open it.
I think we've got somebody with their mic on. I don't know if we can mute it. Okay, thank you. Well, really, with this is also coming from that first slide I showed, where really we need a very candid assessment of your current development, and that's current development any stage, with your supervisor or supervisors and your faculty advisors and departments. In other words, you know, take advantage from all the help that's available to give you that personal assessment. I mean, once you progress on from your PhD, you become into academia, the higher level you goes into academia, you get sometimes you get the availability of coaching and support. But at this stage, it's you can see it as coaching and mentorship. That's really, really important to help you navigate your way through all the difficult stages of the PhD. And it's really, you know, important to have that relationship, grow that relationship with your supervisors. You know, work on it, and your supervisors will work on it as well. But that requires a lot of honesty in terms of if there are any problems to actually bring them to the attention, and also, you know, to take that advice and to turn it around. So it's incumbent on the supervisor as well as the student to give, you know, fairly timely feedback on work, and that's something that's, I know from experience, is very difficult. Sometimes supervisors get extremely busy in terms of the amount of work that's suddenly given to them at certain times of the year, especially when the marking deadlines, etc., come along and all these types of things, or writing a research grant and proposal. And students also have various hurdles that they've got to cross, and sometimes are more busy than other times. But don't underestimate that good communication, that good relationship is really, really important to get that coaching underway. Also, I think this is sometimes, you know, the doctoral consortium is much about the supervisors as about the students, and we all learn from each other as well. I saw one amazing stat the other day from a very recent survey. I can't remember, it was on UK Graduate Council for Education, but it was a survey of supervisors. But one thing that stood out to me was that it was around 70% of supervisors thought that they were excellent or very good at supervision. I don't know, that was worrying to me, because even after all the time that I've supervised, I still regard myself as learning. I always learn, every student I learn from, and I'd never put myself down as 70% or in that bracket of being so confident in my supervision. We're all learning all the time, and we have to work with our students to, you know, get the right tempo and to get the right approach, because every student is different and every supervisor is different. So, you know, that relationship is so important. And supervisors also must take coaching themselves and also must attend training courses. I think that the thing there is to have training courses in institutions that talk about the real issues that supervisors face, not just about, when I showed you the process model, not just understanding the process stages that you go through. So we do have to understand the bureaucracy, but we also have to understand the sort of psychology of supervision and leadership and our roles within that. And that's where the faculties and departments, you know, must offer those support programs. But that can be overwhelming sometimes for students that say, well, you know, so I have to, if I attend every single seminar and every single event, I'm never going to get time to do any research work and do my analysis or do my data collection. So it's a balance to be achieved there, you know, targeting the appropriate support that you think is important, but to work with your supervisor to work out that plan, that learning plan, and move, you know, from your zone of current development to your zone of proximal development, and the support that you need will change as you move through those stages as you scaffold up the process. It's really important as well to learn research through your interaction with your peers. And this is something that, again, some of the slides at the end of the presentation are a summary of a little survey I did at last year's doctoral consortium. I didn't get many responses, unfortunately, and I'll have to do it again to try to put a bit more effort into getting a higher response rate. But there are some interesting comments come back from that, which you can read on the end of this presentation slides afterwards. But one of the key things was people realized too late, I think, that if they work with other students in writing groups and learning support groups and get to use those relationships, that can be a significant help in the PhD process. It can help you become sort of more perhaps friendly, critical of your work and other people's work. And also share the anxiety and have support for that with people. So you do need to have these collaborative approaches. And also very important, another point that came out of that, screaming out of it, was to try to engage in activities in university for teaching, if there's offers of teaching just a few hours a week, or to get involved with that, because that gives you an insight into academic life, but also it gives you a relationship that you can start to build with other members of the faculty or the department who are not actually your supervisors. So you get to know people, and that can also be an informal way of getting peer support and advice for your doctoral work. So really got to coordinate all of these relationships at the departmental and institutional levels. So there's three levels basically. There's the individual psychology element of what you're trying to do, and to try to get that right, to understand your research problem and your approach and how you're going to navigate through this to your career endpoint. There's the relational aspect with your supervisor and your peers, which are really important. When I say peers, that's other students in your department or across the university. And then there's the institutional, formal, structural support that's provided for you to get to that endpoint as well. They're all really, really significant and important. But as I say, from the feedback that I got from the survey, was sometimes people kind of learn that point too late and don't engage in it early enough to get the real benefits from it. So that's the main point to come through from there. And I think we will go on to Laurence now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Laurence.
Okay, so here are just a few points kind of following from what David said, but it's about really how do you kind of get through your PhD. I don't know what stage the current doctoral students are that are listening to this. Some of you may be just beginning, some of you may be kind of quite close to the end, or as Max said, it's good to get there at the end. But there are a couple of things that you know, people have talked about, and you'll see these kind of spread around quite a lot. So it's just trying to bring together some of the kind of received wisdom. So the first thing is it's only an exercise in showing you can do research. I, for my sins, was also, as well as being a PhD supervisor, I was actually director of the Doctoral College here at DeMontfort until earlier in the year. And one of the things that I did try to explain to the students there when they were starting was that, in my view, a PhD is actually a bit of a vanity project. It's a thing that you do because you want to. People don't often get paid to do PhDs for someone else. Sometimes it is tied to a project, but generally you do it because you want to. It's something you're interested in, something you want to know more about, something you want to investigate. You have a burning issue that you want to find out more about. So in a sense, you're doing it for yourself. And that's what I mean by kind of vanity. And the trouble is that after that, someone else is going to have to fund you or pay you to do research. So they're going to have a vested interest in it. So in a sense, you need to kind of go, well, actually, this is mine, you know, but it is only an exercise in showing you can do research. And it's about not kind of, I suppose, you know, what Dave said about it kind of taking over your life. It's about kind of not getting too hung up on it being, well, is it my kind of Nobel Prize piece? No, it is showing you're a competent researcher. Dave's already talked about the kind of the time element. It's quite interesting if you try and find out why is it 3 years? Dave, I think you actually did try and look at this, didn't you? Because I posed that question to you. And because it's been posed to me when I was director of the Doctoral College, people were like, well, "Where's 3 years come from? Why not 2? Why not 4? Where has this sudden timeline come from?"
We can't. Yeah, I was going to say,
no actual route to it, is there?
No, we can't really trace that back, except to say that a lot of funded research projects say 4 years, don't they, when you get a EPSRC case studentship or something like that. So it seems to be a figure that's historically been there, but I think more dominated by the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and maths, which tend to fall within that bracket, because I think their PhD sometimes can be a lot more structured with lab-based experimental work, which can be done in phases or stages to an endpoint to be written up, whereas and a problem that's already defined almost before you go into the PhD itself. Whereas a lot of social science and say business and management PhDs are fairly unstructured at the start, and you've got to define or work around a problem with your supervisors. They might have defined a rough area that they want the PhD to be in, but you'll be given discretion to formulate your angle on that, your perspective on it, and to formulate your research aims, objectives, and the question itself. So that can take that can take up to a year in itself. Yep. So that extends PhDs in our particular discipline areas, I think, maybe into 4 years often, you know, as an average, or 5 years even. If people go part-time. So
I'd agree. People sometimes have this, what they call the kind of road to Damascus, or that sudden light bulb moment where they go, aha, that's what my PhD is about. And it can be within that first year, but actually it can even be later on. I've had students quite close to the end going, oh, now I understand what it was I was trying to find out about all the time. The next point is also kind of related to what Dave said about why people kind of don't complete, why people kind of, you know, that 50% non-completion. Generally, people don't complete a PhD not because they don't want to, but because other things get in the way. You know, by definition, people who are doing a PhD tend to be slightly older. They have more complex lives. People have kids, they have families, they have older relatives, they have caring responsibilities. Maybe they're trying to work at the same time. Maybe they're running a company. Maybe they're involved with other projects. It's all kind of pulling you away from this core thing of doing your PhD. And there's a sense, if you can stick at it, if you can really kind of keep with it, then it will fall into place and you will be able to complete. But it's just almost, it's about just not letting those other life things kind of getting in the way. Yeah. The other thing about doing a PhD is also because going back to this thing about because you're doing it because you want to, not because someone else is funding you. So, for example, we're involved with a large European Union funded project at the moment. And at the beginning of it, we had to say what it is we were going to do. And we now have to produce deliverables showing what we've done. So if we want to deviate from that, it's quite difficult. Whereas in your PhD, it is an opportunity for you to say, I want to try this. I think this is a good way to approach it. It's some new ideas, it's some new things that you can bring in. And going back to this idea of being able to show impact, that's one way of showing impact. It's by saying, look, I've taken this from over here, I've taken that from over there, I've brought them together, and wow, you know, that's produced something that's really different or really exciting. And that's what will lead to kind of being able to think about impact. Dave? Dave has already mentioned this thing about the kind of the loneliness of the long distance runner. You know, a PhD is a marathon, it's not a sprint. It takes place over quite a long period of time. You are the person that's doing your PhD in your area, and it's about finding your community. People are not going to necessarily be in the same area, but they will maybe be able to relate to it, or at least they'll be able to relate to you doing a PhD. And I still remember when I was doing my own PhD, probably about 1 million years ago now, sometimes it feels like that, we decided to form what we called a PhD club. And we kind of went round various parts of the university, not in our area. And this is a Redbridge University, very traditional, a bit like the one that's sitting behind Rachel at the moment, I think. And we literally found people in offices that said, I've not spoken to someone for the last 2 weeks or 2 months. And they had just, I don't know, they ended up in this kind of isolation. And, you know, psychologically, it's a bit like what we're going through, all going through at the moment with the pandemic, but at least we've got this kind of virtual interaction. You know, people were just sitting there and just kind of working away, but completely kind of almost at sea with everything else. So it's about going out, talking to other people, other PhD students. Every university, every organization will have some form of doctoral college or graduate school. Often there is a PhD society that's been set up by them or maybe by the student union. And it's about, as it says here, maybe just seeing where other people are at, and actually, you know, they're in as much of a hole as I'm in, and maybe together we can help each other climb out. Or actually, yeah, no, that's a good idea. You've done that. I'll think about how I can, you know, take that on board. Maybe it's how they work with their supervisor. But, you know, we can learn a lot from our peers. That's actually kind of really helpful, but it's also about, you know, just being supportive of each other. The other thing that I also find quite interesting when even with my own PhD students, is that I can only talk to my supervisor. That's the only person that I can talk to. And one of the things about the normal PhD consortium that we would do is it gives PhD students an opportunity, a legitimate opportunity, to kind of talk to a couple of facilitators who are experts around the field, but also to some other students. And what you can do, and there is nothing in any of the regulations that say you can't talk to other people, and especially experts in your field. And it's great to kind of get that input because, you know, your supervisor will do their best, but there's still only one person, and together you will find that you'll kind of influence each other. But actually to get other people, other experts, it's absolutely amazing. And one of the things that is great about being a student, it's a great excuse to ask questions, to go up to someone and say, hey, you're really good in the field. I'd like to ask you your opinion on something. Everyone who's an academic likes to be able to give an opinion, and we've got lots of them, so we love sharing them. Publishing, as Dave was saying, you know, it's part of, you know, understanding where's a good place to publish. We are encouraging our students to publish these days as they go through, because if you do want to go into an academic environment, then actually having some papers under your belt is not just important, it's absolutely key to be able to get your foot in the door. But you do need to make sure that you and the people that are supporting you feel that you're ready and at the right point to be able to do that. So one of the things that's kind of the key element about a PhD is this idea about originality. It's one of the key kind of elements that is seen as kind of the definition of what a PhD is. It's probably quite hard to compose a thesis without being original in some form or another, because you're doing something probably that no one else has done. You're bringing in ideas that other people haven't done. So in general, I do find that people have got it in there. What probably is more tricky is being explicit about it. so that when you write your thesis, when you present your work, you're clear about what your original elements are, and you're clear about how you kind of present it to the rest of the world. So on the other hand, try to be original. Try and make sure that you've got some of those elements in there that you can then kind of talk to other people about. I think the next point is really important, and this can kind of go up and down as you go through the different phases of doing your PhD, but it's about believing in yourself. There's actually quite a good blog that someone's written who's done their own PhD and now has kind of formed a career around advising other PhDs. He's got a whole blog post there on what they call the imposter syndrome. And most academics kind of, whether they'll admit to it or not, have an element of this, which is, you know, am I good enough? Should I really be here? Am I, you know, when are people going to find out that actually, you know, I shouldn't be here after all? And actually they're going to kind of either kick me out or tell me to kind of go back and start again. And it's about, you know, finding that belief in yourself, having your peers to, you know, help you find that belief, and having your supervisory team to help you find that belief as well. And actually, you know, stuff that other people have published, you know, when you can find, oh, actually, you know, that's not quite as good as I thought it was when I first read it. I can use this other material to kind of show my critical analysis. And you go, well, actually, okay. So I, you know, I do know something about this, and maybe I should be here. It's about kind of building that up so that by the time you get to the end point, especially to the Viva, you're in that position where you can really strongly kind of defend yourself. Right from the very beginning, everyone says that it's much harder to do than it is, it's much easier to say than it is to do. But it just means that by the time you kind of get into your thesis, but also external publications, showing your impact, it's about being able to kind of represent your ideas in lots of different ways. And whereas traditionally I probably would have said, you know, writing is very much about academic writing, I think these days, especially in 21st century, it's also about being able to present your ideas in much more easy to digest formats, much more amenable formats. As you'll see on the chat, you know, Savas is already saying, don't forget to tweet about the conference. You know, he's got a hashtag there, hashtag UKAIS 2020. But it's also about being able to present your work. So as you're going through, tweeting about it, maybe blog posts, but even writing things for outlets such as The Conversation, as well as your academic papers. And this is really where you can get your ideas out, other people can take it up. And this is all about kind of creating this idea that's kind of adding to the impact of your work. It's, you know, a core part of what you're doing is about reading, but it's also about kind of turning that around and about writing. So making sure that you've kind of got good notes, you've got good systems to kind of support you on that. These are all kind of the bread and butter of doing the PhD. But, you know, again, as it says here, the writing, you know, it can take quite a long time, depending on kind of how familiar you are with writing. It gets better as you go along. It's like everything, the more you do, the easier it gets, but you have to do it a lot before it kind of gets easier. So you have to kind of believe in that as well. So, you know, especially for writing your final thesis, but also writing papers, you know, don't underestimate how long it takes. But again, get help if you need it. Most universities now have kind of English writing units that can give you advice, can give you support. You can get it from peers as well. I know at least one of my PhD students that, you know, somehow by hook or by crook, every single chapter that she's writing, she's getting friends and colleagues to kind of proofread and give her feedback before she even gives it to us as her supervisors. So, you know, kind of call in all those favors. Maybe you'll have to promise to do it for themselves, for your colleagues when they get to that point. But, you know, make sure you get as much help as you can. And then it kind of helps you a lot when you kind of are honing your skills there. And above all, and this is probably the most difficult one for you to actually do. I think everyone who's done a PhD and got out at the other end will kind of look back and go, actually, yeah, actually that was pretty good. As I said, it's something that you do for yourself. You have a lot of freedom. You have a lot of opportunities as a student to go and talk to other people. And it's the beginning of building something, whether it's your career in academia or your career in industry. So if you can, try and enjoy it. Try and believe that, you know, at the end it is going to be worthwhile, because it will be. But try and enjoy it as well as whilst you're going along, because, you know, we only have one life, so it's worth enjoying it as you go through.
Another factor in that, Laurence, is for your supervisor to enjoy it as well. So you know, that's the other side. If you're both enjoying the work, it's a big plus, as it were.
Yeah.
get this done.
So there's also a more formal way of thinking about how you can support yourself and support your research as well. So VTI, which is an organization that was set up by the government and is now kind of semi-independent, is an organization that is specifically about kind of helping researchers to develop, and they do a lot of kind of development work and also provide a lot of support both for students and also for supervisors in institutions. Dave's already mentioned the UK Council for Graduate Education. So they're again a body which is out there to help with support students and supervisors, and they provide support to doctoral colleges and graduate schools. So VTI have produced this lovely diagram that you see in the middle. It can be used as a sort of planner. It can plan, you can help it to plan kind of all the different knowledge areas, the kind of skills, the knowledge, the areas that you would be looking at developing as you go through the PhD process. I know that some institutions are kind of moving away from this, as well as some are kind of still using it. I think one of the things about developing these sorts of approaches, and especially these sorts of diagrams, is you have to remember that these are organizations that are working across all the disciplines, and it's an incredibly wide range of disciplines. And when I was director of the doctoral college, one of the things that was really brought home to me was that the PhD and the PhD process is quite different in different disciplines. If you're in arts and humanities, as opposed to business and law, or the sciences, or the kind of the engineering fields. So the trouble with this sort of diagram, the issue with it, is that it's very broad, it's very generic. It can apply to you, but it can also apply to lots of other people. So in terms of its usefulness, it becomes, you know, less specifically useful to you. It also tries to cover absolutely everything. And I know when I've had students look at it, they go, oh my God, if I do all of that, then I won't have time to do my PhD. So again, you have to kind of cherry pick from it. What are the useful bits that are going to be useful to you? Pick them out, use them, and then don't worry about the rest.
Yeah, I think this is where your supervisor as a coach and a mentor comes in, Laurence, to work with you, to find out, you know, which elements of that are relevant, where you can focus at which stage, and also on your own personal learning needs. So I think that's where, you know, a lot of support can be used.
I just wanted to mention there is lots of other informal advice out there. I mentioned this guy before, James Hayton. He's someone who did his own PhD, and now he's kind of turned his skills. I think he was a physicist, and now he's turned his skills into actually advising and supporting other PhD students. He's got a very good website, the James Hayton PhD. I'm not associated with it at all, so I'm not trying to flog anything. I think he's got a book, but he's got lots of really good free stuff there, lots of blog postings to you know, things like beating writer's block, or, you know, tips for working from home under the lockdown. So, you know, please go out, have a look at those things. Do remember though that, you know, in fact, his is actually a UK-based PhD, so he's going to talk about it from a UK-centric perspective, which is the same as Dave and I. If you're based in other countries and other environments, the PhD process is slightly different, so you do have to kind of adjust whatever you're looking at to your kind of local context.
Okay.
We're coming towards the end here, I think,
yeah,
Dave, aren't we?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, what I'll say here is that perhaps this is something that we can do as a group of supervisors within UKAIS. I'm throwing this out, where we can come up with perhaps little one-page case examples of doctoral students that we think, on the impact side, have made a significant contribution over the years.
Little vignettes maybe to kind of give people some idea.
This is something that we can do. We've all got, you know, a lot of experience combined collectively with us, and this is a project perhaps for the next year. And Savas, we can talk to him about that as well. But there's some, in talking about the impact of the PhD, I put that in because this is the new buzzword in research. It's about your research being relevant, not just being, as I said before, an intellectual endeavor, which is just for you in your personal quest for knowledge. It's actually doing good for society and doing good for a particular cause, or solving a particular, or trying to structure a particular problem area. So one of the excellent resources out there, Laurence has just mentioned the excellent resource for looking at how to conduct your PhD. An excellent resource out there is by Professor Mark Reed, and he's got a couple of a latest version of his book is about 3 editions now, but how to get impact from your research, and amazing resources on his website and blog, lots of templates and guides you can work through to look at how you can put impact into your research and how to work towards impact. This might be something that happens a little bit in your PhD, but can happen potentially a lot afterwards. So that might be one of these kind of endpoints where you could go with your research, especially when you think about career direction, or just thinking, well, hey, I've come up with a really good idea here, or this is knowledge that people should be shared and people should know. It's how to go about that using all the tools and techniques available to you to do that. But just 1 second, kind of 1 minute example of a doctoral student, which is sort of the sign of the times at the moment. One of the students I supervised, going back about 6-7 years ago, was head of diagnostics of Newcastle Hospitals Trusts in the area of pathology and large-scale pathology automation. And his work was all about how to implement large-scale pathology automation for testing, diagnostics testing, for hematology, microbiology, and all these types of things, working in closely with companies like Siemens or Roche, but how to do this at scale so you could get something like 20,000 tests a day. So it's a bit of an eye-opener at the moment, looking at what the government's trying to do with testing, how they're saying they're ramping it up, when we know from his research, and his research did have impact within the hospitals for strategy, for how to get the investment for these labs, which are many millions of pounds, very sophisticated robotics and tracking systems, all IT integration associated with that as well. So his own research, which was working within 2 major hospital trusts up here, has significant impact in those hospitals for their adoption of those technologies and the upgrading of their pathology testing requirements, not only for those 2 hospitals as well, but for the whole region, in terms of integration of labs across the region. So it's a bit of we've known that we've got that capacity all along. So it's just my point I want to make here when I'm watching the television and not throwing things at it. When I'm hearing people talk about testing, I've known for 10 years how much capacity there is, because when they put this capacity in, they had overcapacity. And it's just not being really adopted nationally. That's the problem. But that's an example of a doctoral student subject, which at the time we thought was important, incredibly important, but now in the next 5 years is going to be absolutely massively important in terms of thinking about large-scale automation of testing and pathology. And all his work's there, and he's actually got a very senior management position, working on that and using his doctoral research and the theories that he came up with. It was a very rigorous piece of work, as well as having impact in terms of reaching significance, because it went into all sorts of aspects of what we now call social materiality, relational ontology. So there was a very deep theoretical aspect to it, showing that the design decisions that we take in technology can have a serious impact on the way that work is organized. And he predicted 10 years ago that there'd be a complete rundown of skills in the biomedical scientist sector, which is also something that we're now suffering from, because we haven't got enough of these really highly trained people, because technology has really taken over a large part of their work. But that doesn't give us the flexibility anymore. It's all hard coded. So that's just one quick example of having impact from a doctorate. I don't think you'd mind me talking about that.
Yeah. And so the one that I was going to just quickly talk about was a PhD student of mine who was looking, comes from Bangladesh, a very agrarian society where land is really important. And he was actually looking at the computerization of land records management. And this is a hugely significant thing for lots of families there, for the vast majority of the population, because, you know, the land that you own is essentially the only kind of resources that you have, the only significant resources. And, you know, traditionally they were held in these, the records were in these big, you know, physical books that were slowly decaying over the ages, and the government had decided that they wanted to kind of computerize it all. As it happens, the student was also a civil servant, working in an area that was kind of relevant to this. So he had, he had an in to the organization to be able to understand about it. But again, because he was part of the organization, the ideas that came out from it could also influence the different stages and what they were going to do. In fact, they'd already implemented some, and then it was how they were going to kind of carry on with the next stages of the implementation. The thing that I just wanted to highlight about his work was, although it was, in general, impact is seen as a good thing. It's about, as Dave said, about benefiting society. However, in that particular context, there were certain groups of people who, because of the systems that have been in place, didn't like the new systems that were coming in because it interrupted and affected essentially their income. They were what they called middlemen. And so you also have to be cognizant that when we're thinking about what we're doing with these technologies and how they're kind of interrupting society, it's not going to benefit everyone. So the impact is not equal across everyone. You actually have to be aware of that local political, socio-cultural context. And we can't ignore these things, and our impact is going to be kind of variable in that sense. So we just need to be kind of sensitive to these things. Okay, I think we're actually at the end of time. Dave, are we going to open up for a few?
Have one or two. It's up to Savas or Marie, who's.
We've got the AGM at 10, but we probably could have. 10:15. Yeah, we have this swap over, so we have got a few moments for some questions, because it would be a shame not to have a few sort of interactions with the people here who've joined in. Yeah, I would say. So, are you gonna host that, Laurence?
Yeah, Max, are you on the Starship somewhere?
Yes, I am. I was just going to jump in very briefly. Hi everyone, nice to see you. Greetings from space. I'm getting bored at home, so there's different things to try out. I've just posted in the chat an email address which I would like all the PhD students to send an email to, saying, yes, I'd like to be there for 2021. So if you please could do that, then we will be able to send you a reminder at the end of this year to say, hey, 2021 is happening. It will be great. It will be in Oxford. It would be nice to see you all in person. So please, just drop us a line so we have you on the list to invite you for the next year's conference. And thank you very much, Laurence and David.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I don't know, we have, as I said, we have a couple of minutes. Do we have any other questions that people were burning, or comments even? Doesn't have to be questions.
Even if people want to put something on the chat.
Yep.
Okay, could I say something? Am I speaking to the, can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah, I can hear
loud and clear, yes.
Okay, we're in the IS, and my name is Roland Njoko, and I'm in Ireland. I'm in Cork, University College Cork.
Hi, Roland.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm in a structured PhD program. I'm in the 4th year. And sometimes in my PhD, we battle with this multidisciplinarity of the IS department, and we find we're dealing with so many things, so many people, maybe with one side, looking at one side of the coin, but you find yourself dealing with health, you're dealing with people in other areas, and then you find that you are drawn away most of the time talking maybe what specialists in medicine should talk about, and then you are an amateur in that field, and you are doing everything, and you don't have those people to make a contribution. Even if they do, I mean, that's not really your interest. How do you streamline this thing to make sure you're always narrowed down to IS?
Right. I think this has become a problem over the last 10 or more years, in that we used to have much more coherent sets of IS academics and IS students with IS courses, or business information technology, information systems, information technology courses. That's now become very diffuse, and we're scattered across various departments with various different names. So I think it now becomes, sometimes students can get isolated in particular departments, in particular universities. And I think this is where we need to make much more use of collaborative and working in communities across universities. I mean, UKAIS is a good hub for that, and maybe, you know, we've got to scale up what we do and become more proficient at getting and sharing out there, especially amongst our PhD community. IS academics, they come together occasionally at the big conferences, and that's something that as a PhD student you can perhaps aim to do, is to make sure that perhaps you target your conferences to meet like-minded people. So get funding to go to doctoral consortiums, not only at UKAIS, but maybe ESIS or even ISIS. And then you'll meet people who are sharing the same sort of interests as you are. But I think the message is that really we've got to work virtually more and collaborate more if the people that we need to talk to are not really surrounding us physically or geographically within our own university. I think that's just become a fact of life. But sometimes it's surprising when you do go to other faculties, you do meet people who are working in a similar area to you, but you've never known that they existed because they're wrapped up in a different faculty in what you think is a different subject. But when you sort of find out about their research, you think, well, actually, you're using the same ideas as I am. The subject might be slightly different, but I never really knew that they were working on that particular problem. I'll give you an example. At my own faculty or business school, I ended up supervising, because the expertise wasn't there, quite a lot of students in built environment, because a lot of their problems to do with collaborative IT working across projects. So one of those students was, excellent student, ended up working on what's called building information modeling, which had an awful lot of information systems theory and relevance, and ended up also getting a very highly paid job for HS2. Whether that exists in a few years, we shall know. But that's sometimes the surprising fact that as an information systems person, you do find that your students are in other faculties and departments these days. And as supervisors, often, we can be called in to help supervise as a second supervisor sometimes on these projects. So there is expertise around. But I would certainly say, give the message that, try to go out and search for your community and other people that you might work collaboratively with. Because, from what the presentation, from the slides we put up, it's so important not to be isolated and to be lonely.
I mean, just coming back to the point that Roland was making about kind of the different reference disciplines, I think the thing about IS is that we've always drawn upon other areas, but we are not going to be experts in them. I completely agree. But that's where, as I said, you can draw in other experts. So not just other students, but also other academics. So that if you do want that extra bit of knowledge, I know about the medical field or about statistics or something, that you draw in the relevant expert to help support you. And then the other thing I would say is, don't pretend that you are an expert in that field. You just need to show what it is, what bits you're drawing from them. So for example, if it's statistics, if you just need to know that bit about statistics to help with your research, to help with your project, then you just draw on that bit. But don't say, oh, well, I know everything about statistics after that. It's just about drawing the bits that you need as and when they're helpful to you, and drawing the experts as and when they're helpful to you as well. Okay, Marie, do we want to have a short break before we move to the AGM, or? I think it would be useful to have like a comfort break, really, and plus we're moving on to a different Zoom link. Yes. Okay, so everyone, so I would say thank you very much for everyone who's come along and joined us today. I was tweeting away, but I'm sure everyone found that really interesting. We're going to we've recorded the session. And I will make sure that's available through the website, and I've tweeted on that as well.
And also, Marie will make the slides available later.
Okay.
On the website.
On the website as well. So we'll divert everyone there, which is probably best.
So Marie, are we on a different Zoom link, or is it the same one?
It's a different Zoom link in the next one.
For the next one, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Diana seems to say she thinks it's the same. So
who does? Sorry.
I've asked. Diana was saying it's the same. So I've asked, is it a new link or the same one?
It looks like it's a new link on the.
It is a new link, and I've just pasted it into the chat.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, then. See you later, guys.
5 minutes.
Thank you, everyone.
5 minutes.
See you in a
5
minute.
minutes.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Thank you. Bye. Bye.